Masechet Horayot, Daf Vav. On the previous daf, we saw three different opinions about who brings the Pad Ha'alem Davar Shel Sibur. Rabbi Meir said, the judges bring one Pad. Simple. Rabbi Yehuda says, the tribes bring it, and you're going to have to bring 12. The guilty tribes will each have to bring a pod, and also the innocent tribes have to bring a pod on behalf of the guilty ones. So you're going to have 12. And Rabbi Shimon says both the tribes and the judges, but according to Rabbi Shimon, only the guilty tribes. So if it's 7 guilty tribes, 7 parim, plus the judges will bring 1, and you come to 8. Now we're going to quote a baraita and analyze it according to those three different opinions. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ma tamod lomar upar sheni ben bakar tikach lechatat. Im lelamed shehem shenayim, v'alo kevar ne'emar, v'aseh et ha'echad chatat ve'et ha'echad ola laHashem. He's asking about this pasuk here in Bamidbar chapter 8, about the inauguration of the Leviim. And says, here's what you're going to do to inaugurate them. Lakechu par ben bakar min hato solit b'labashamin. You're going to take one par, and par sheni ben bakar tikach lechatat. And you take a second par, and the second one will be a chatat. Now, why do we need all that information? After all, we have here in Pasuk 12, says right here that there's 2 chatats, and there's 2 parim. One's going to be a chatat, one's going to be an olah. So I already know from here that there's 2. So why does the Torah have to tell me in 2 different Pesukim that there are 2 parim? Ufar sheni la'ola ma ola lo ne'echelet af hatat lo ne'echelet. Rather, these words ufar sheni come to teach us an important halacha, because we might think that the par lechatat could be eaten for the Leviim. Generally, a chatat offering can be eaten by kohanim, most of them, those that are sprinkled on the mizbeach that's outside. The kohanim eat it. So here when it says ne'echelet chatat lalviim, it doesn't mean that the Leviim are going to eat the chatat, because Leviim don't eat a korban chatat, but it means that the kohanim would normally eat a korban chatat that is brought by other people. So you might think that this case also would be the same. That's why it says upar sheni, a second par, a second to the olah, and it's like the olah. It is a korban chatat, but it's similar to an olah in that just like a korban olah is not eaten at all, so too this korban hatat will not be eaten. It's a special korban hatat. Okay, the question that we're going to have is not from this part, but from the next part of the baraita. Kayosebo Amar Rabbi Yoseh. Now we're going to see another case of a korban hatat that is not eaten. Habaim mehashebi hagola hikribu olot Elohei Israel parim shenem asarat vegomer hakol ola. This is a pasuk in the book of Ezra that says that those people that returned from exile, they made a special set of korbanot. Hikribu olot Elohei Israel parim shenem asar al kol Yisrael. So you have 12 bulls for all of Israel. Elim tish'im v'shisha kebasim shib'a v'shib'a. And this is the key for us. Sefire hatat shenem asar. So they brought 96 rams, 77 lambs, and here 12 he-goats as korban hatat. And then it says hakol ola laHashem. So let's analyze this pasuk. Hakol ola salkadatech. Are all of these animals a korban ola? Efshar shehatat ola. I understand for the ones that are listed earlier in the pasuk, fine, they could be a korban ola. But the last one, it says it's a hatat. So is a hatat the same as an ola? Usually a hatat would be eaten. Ela hakol ke ola. Ma ola lo ne'echelet, af hatat lo ne'echelet. Rather, all the animals here were treated like an ola in that they were not eaten. So these 12 were not eaten. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Al avodah zarah hevi'um. And now a second baraita, Rabbi Yehuda explains, these were not eaten because they were brought by the return, those who returned from exile in the time of Ezra. They brought these 12 to atone for idolatry. Because it was an atonement for idolatry, they were not eaten. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shemuel, al avodah zarah she'asu b'mei Sidkiyahu. What idolatry? Did they do idolatry in Bavel? No. Shemuel explains, this is idolatry that they did during the reign of Sidkiyahu, the last king of Judea. Back then, they did idolatry, and then the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed and at the end of the reign of Sidkiyah, and they were sent into exile, and they never got to atone for that sin of idolatry. And now that they returned, they're bringing these 12 animals as korban hatat for idolatry. Okay, that's the data. Now let's analyze. Bishlamar biyuda mashkachadla lehane 12 hataot kigon dechatu 12 shebatim demaitu 12 seirim. Okay, well, according to the Yehuda, who says that each of the tribes have to bring a pod lehatat, and if it's idolatry, then they're going to have to bring a pod and a sa'ir each. Both those who sinned and those who didn't sin have to bring a pod and a sa'ir. So we can how do you have a case that 12 have to bring it? Well, if all 12 tribes sinned, then all 12 would have to bring it. That's easy. Or it could be that actually only 7 of the tribes sinned. But even if only 7 sinned, the rest of them are dragged along. And even the 5 that didn't sin have to bring a pod and a sa'ir. So it's easy to explain this baraita for the Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon nameh mashkach ada kigon dechatu 11 shevatim demaitu 11 seirim veidach debet din. According to Rabbi Shimon, we also can have a case. It's easy to think of a case. It's where 11 tribes did avodah zarah back then, and so now 11 of the tribes have to bring a sa'ir because it was a sin of idolatry, and then also one more of the bet din. They also have to bring one. We're assuming that this sin was done because of the mistaken ruling of the bet din. Ela l'Rabbi Meir de'amar bet din mebi'in velo sibur shenem asar hechi mashkachat la. But according to Rabbi Meir, he says only the bet din brings a sin offering, and not everybody else. So it's only one. So how could you have 12? It should be only one. And the answer is kegon dechatu v'hadar chatu v'hadar chatu ad teresa zimneh. We're talking about a case where they sinned, and then they realized that this was a mistake. They repented, and then they sinned again and repented and sinned again, and this happened 12 times. So actually, they're bringing the bet din itself is bringing 12 for 12 different incidents. And now we ask another question. Didn't all those people who sinned in the time of Sidkiyah die out? Right, that was a long time ago, before the exile, and now we're talking about after the return from exile, so it's about 70 years at least. And so generally, if someone sins and has to bring korban hatat, they have to bring it. But if they die, then nobody brings it on their behalf. That's it. The opportunity is gone. So all those people who did avodah zarah, they died. So now why are they still bringing a korban hatat for their sin of idolatry? Amar Rav Papa ki gemiri hatat shemetu be'aleha b'mita hanemele b'yachid aval lo b'sibur lefi she'en mita b'sibur. Rav Papa says a very beautiful and important rule. When we learn that a korban hatat whose owners had died, then that's it. You don't bring that korban hatat anymore. That's only an individual made an individual sin and designated an animal and then died. That's it. We don't bring that animal as a korban. We cannot bring it. That applies to an individual. But for a congregation, if the entire congregation sinned, then even though the members of the congregation died out, the congregation itself is its own entity, and therefore we have a rule, and mita besibur. There is no death to a congregation. It's kind of like we have a concept today of a corporation, and a corporation can be responsible even if the corporation did something bad 100 years ago and polluted some land or still stole something. You can sue the corporation even if the CEO and the board members are all died or all fired, right? You can still, the corporation is still responsible. So too, a whole congregation is a continuity that's not dependent on the individual still being alive. How does Rav Papa know that a congregation never dies? Maybe a pasuk in Tehillim. as a blessing to the king, that instead of your fathers shall be your sons. Your sons should take over, and you should have a dynasty, and your sons replace you. And so according to that, for good and for bad, that the sons will take responsibility for a korban chatat of the fathers, and a dynasty continues. And so just like a father is alive, so if he has a dynasty, the dynasty will continue and to be alive. Is that the source? If so, if that's the source, then even an individual, because we're talking about an individual king or an individual person, that your children should replace you, should come instead of you, and so you'll be alive through your children. That's a very nice concept, but that would apply to an individual just as much to a congregation. So that can't be a source, because the Papa only said it for a congregation. אלא דוקיה דרפפא מסעיר דראש חודש, דאמר לך מנה מייתה מתרומת הלשכה, והמייתה להו מישראל, ואנך דפיישה הכי מייתו, אלא שמע מינה חטאת שמתו בעליה בסיבור קרבה. Rather, the Papa's proof must be the sa'ir that's brought every Rosh Chodesh. It's a sin offering, then it's paid for from the temple treasury that everybody brings. Everybody has to give machazit shekel for communal offerings, and that will pay for the sa'ir on Rosh Chodesh. Now, if you think of all the people who gave machazit shekel, they gave it in Adar. After a month or 2 or 3, there's going to be some people that die, and yet we could still use that money in order to buy the korban for the next Rosh Chodesh. So what do you see from here? We don't say that, some people died who gave machasita shekel, so therefore this money that we collected, some of the people died, we can't bring a korban from it anymore. We don't say that. Rather, we say chatat, a korban chatat, or the money that's designated to buy a korban chatat, or they bought it already, even though some of its owners died, but we're still going to bring it, because it's not an individual korban, it's a communal korban, and the community never dies. So isn't that a good proof? We say no. No, in the case of Rosh Chodesh, it's not for sure that people will die every month. It might be a month that goes by and nobody dies. And so it's not for sure that someone will die. But in the case of Sidkiah, the generation of Sidkiah, from then till they return back to Israel, for sure, everybody, most people, or maybe everybody died. So you can't compare Rosh Chodesh, where it's possible that nobody died, to a case where for sure people died. Ela tamadra papa mehacha dichtib kapela mecha Yisrael asher padita Hashem roya kapara zot shetechaber al Yosei Mitzrayim medichtib asher padita. Rather, the pasuk is from the law of Agla Arufa, a murder mystery. We don't know who killed this body. We found the body, and so we bring the people from the closest city, and we make a prayer that the Agla Rufa, that we bring the Agla and we break its neck, and we say that this ceremony should atone for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed. Now, when we're doing this Agla Rufa, it's going to happen 1 generation, 2 generations, 100 generations after Yetziat Mitzrayim. So when it says Asher Padita, that you have redeemed, right? This should be a atonement for the people that you redeemed. But that was a long time ago that they redeemed. So now we're going to have atonement now, many generations later, whenever it might happen, for a generation a long time ago. So we learn from here that this atonement for this generation can work for those who left Egypt, because there is a community, because it's a community, it's a nation, and the nation never dies, right? Because it says Asher Padita. So isn't that a good proof? Midame hatam kulehu itinun. No, that's different, because in that case, all those people exist now who were around at the time of the murder. Now, the murder happened last week on Sunday. The people in the closest city are all alive who now, and let's say nobody died since last Sunday. So the people that were responsible, quote unquote, responsible for making sure that nobody would go into the wilderness and travel alone, or during the night, or in a dangerous situation. So the people at this time are alive, and we're bringing the korban mainly for the people that are alive now, who are all the people that were alive when the murder happened, and they're still alive right now. We're bringing the korban for them, and so they're all alive. Now, once we're bringing an atonement for all those who were alive, then we can go include those who were dead also. But that we cannot prove from here that a congregation never dies, and that you could bring an atonement now for people that are long dead and they're all dead. That you can't do. If you bring it for people that's alive, then you can include other people that are dead, but you can't bring it just for people that are dead. Right, but in this case, was anybody alive from back then that they could still bring atonement? Right, so the principle that we're learning from a gladufa is that at least some of the people who you're making atonement for have to be alive, even if not everybody. Even if some people from that city died since last Sunday, that would also be okay. Some of the people that are still alive we're bringing atonement for, and since you're bringing atonement for those alive, you can also bring atonement for the dead. But in the case of Sidkiah, didn't everybody die? And we say, actually, there are some people that were alive from the time of Sidkiah until. It's not that long. It's 70 or so years. And so there might be people that lived that 80 years old, 90 years old. There might be a few people that lived to 100, even back then. And then we prove, in fact, that that's so. The Pasuk says that when they built the second Bet HaMikdash, many of the Kohanim and Leviim and the heads of the houses, the elders who had seen the first house standing on its foundations, wept with a loud voice when this house was before their eyes, and many shouted aloud for joy. So it says when the new Bet HaMikdash was built, the younger people were so joyous because they never saw Bet HaMikdash in their lives. They were so happy to have one. But the elders who remembered the first Bet HaMikdash were crying because the first Bet HaMikdash was so glorious, and the second Bet HaMikdash, when it was first built, was not glorious at all. It was not built so nicely, and they were actually crying. So you see that there were survivors that are still alive. Now we ask, maybe those who were survived were a minority. You're not going to bring a korban now for just a few people, just a minority of people. Right? It has to be the majority. I mean, I understand if a few people died, okay, we're still a congregation, and we'll bring it for the majority who were alive, and the minority will include also. But don't you need a majority to have been alive? And the answer is yes, a majority were alive. Haketiv v'lo hikiru bekol, rather, ve'en ha'am makirim kol, teruat ha'simcha l'kol bechi ha'am, ve'akol nishma ad menachok. The pasuk right after that in Ezra says that the people could not discern the shouts of joy from the sounds of weeping of the people, as the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard from afar off. So you could see from here that it wasn't that everybody was shouting for joy and a few people crying, because then you wouldn't be able to hear the crying, but rather the crying was so loud that you couldn't even distinguish, and this noise of weeping was heard from far away. That shows that the elders who were still alive were actually the majority. And this explains why so many generations later, even though that generation had died out, still they could bring the korban even now. Now we go back and ask a question about those se'irim that were brought because of the sin of the time of Sidkiah. V'hamizidin havu, the people that worshipped idolatry in the time of Sidkiah, they did so intentionally. This was not unintentional. They knew what they were doing, and generally, if you do a sin with intention, you can't bring a korban. It's not effective. Horayot shahaitan. And the answer is this was a one-time edict because the people are coming back and they wanted to start off with a new slate and they wanted to atone for what happened way a long time ago. And so this was special permission given to bring a korban chatat even though the idolatry was b'mezid. Hachinam mistabera dila temachi elim tish'im v'shisha v'kebasim shib'im v'shib'a keneged mi el horayot shahaitan b'hachana me horayot shahaitan. And this makes sense that all of these were exceptions, because if not, then what about the 96 animals that they brought and the 77? What are they bringing that for? Just bringing olaz, just like that? Rather, this is a Hora'at Sha'ah, that since they're starting everything from new and they want to start off with a clean slate, they brought all these animals as a special one-time edict. Tenor Banan. Okay, another braita that also we're going to analyze according to these three different opinions. Met ehad min hasibur hayavin. Ehad min betin peturin mantana. Braita teaches that if one of the members of the public died, then the public still brings a korban. But if one of the members of a bet din died, then the bet din does not bring a korban. We're talking about a case of a hora'ah, where the bet din gave a wrong ruling, and then the people followed it. And then if one died, if some of the public died, then they still bring it. But if one of the judges died, then the judges do not bring their par. So Mantana, who is the author of this baraita? Amar Chisda, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir he. So Rav says, it makes sense, this Rabbi Meir, de Amar, bet din mevi'in lo sibur, hilkach met echad min hasibur chayavin, takaim kuleh bet din, met echad min bet din, Peturin, Daviala, Chatat Shemet Echad Min HaShutafin, Umishum Hachi, Peturin. It must be Rabbi Meir who says that it's the judges that are responsible for bringing the par, and the Sibur, the tribes, do not bring a par. Therefore, if a member of the tribes died, then so that doesn't matter. The tribes died, but they're not the ones bringing the korban. They're not the ones that are responsible. The judges are responsible. They're the ones that sinned by making an erroneous ruling, and they're all alive, so certainly they have to bring it. It has nothing to do with the people. I mean, it's true, the judges only bring it if it's the majority of the people, because then you say, oh, they misled a majority of the people, so their sin is only triggered if most people are following it. But the point is that they're the ones that have to bring korban hatat, and they are still alive. They're all the members of the bet din are alive. But if one of the members of the bet din died, then all the members of the bet din, all the judges, are exempt. Why? Because it's like a korban hatat, where one of partners, if it's owned jointly by partners, and one of them died, then you do not bring that korban, and so therefore they are exempt. Because if even one judge dies, they're all considered partners. And unlike a congregation never dies, but partnerships do die. If one member dies, it's not called a partnership anymore. So this makes sense according to the Rabbi Meir. Matkif la Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef disagrees with Rav and says, "V'nokma Rabbi Shimon damar bet din im hasibur met echad min hasibur hayavin de'en sibur metim met echad min bet din peturin kedamrinan de'chatat shutafin hi." Rav Yosef says we can explain this braita also according to the Rabbi Shimon, who says that a bet din brings one par, and each of the tribes that sinned also bring a par, and therefore, if one of the tribes died, so they are liable. One person or many people in a tribe died, the tribe still has to bring it. Each of the tribes that are guilty has to bring it, because a congregation never dies, and so therefore they're going to have to continue. Whereas if one of the judges die, then the judges are not liable to bring theirs, as we said for the Rabbi Meir. That would also apply for the Rabbi Shimon, because the judges are considered partners, and partners, once the one member of the partnership dies, the partnership does not continue, and therefore none of the judges have to bring it. That's Rav Yosef. Amar le Abaye, Shaminan le Rabbi Shimon damar hatat shutafin ena meta. Abaye challenges and says, we have a source that according to Rabbi Shimon, and you want to say this is Rabbi Shimon, he says that a chatat that's brought, but that is responsible to be brought by partners, does not die generally if you have a single owner and he has to bring in korban hatat, and then that single owner dies, then you let that animal die. If not, you can let it graze until it gets a blemish, and then you can sell it. But if the owner died, then the animal has to be left to die as well. So Rabbi Shimon does not think that when it comes to partners, the animal has to die. Tetanya par v'sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim she'avdu hiv'ifrish acherim tachtehem yamutu kulan divrei Rabbi Yehuda. If you had a pod and a sa'ir that are brought on Yom Kippur, the pod is brought to atone for the Kohanim. The Sa'ir is brought to atone for the nation. These two korbanot of Yom Kippur, if they get lost, and then both of them get lost, and they got another pod and a second Sa'ir to replace them and use them, and then the first ones were found. Now the first ones, we don't need them anymore. They are left to die, according to the Biyudah. Fine, that makes sense, because it's treated like any korban hatat, where you don't need it anymore. It's left to die, like if the owner died. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer Yir'u lefi she'en hatat sibur meta. However, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, no, don't let them die. Rather, we offer them because we don't need them anymore. We just used it. But we don't have to let them die. Rather, we can let them graze until they get a blemish, and then we can sell them. Why? Because it's a chatat sibur. And a chatat sibur is not left to die. What do you see here? That according to Rabbi Shimon, not only the chatat, the sa'ir, that's for the people, but also the pad, that is for the kohanim. The kohanim are really partners, right? Aren't that the same as the judges, right? It's a bunch of people. It's not called a whole congregation, the kohanim, but just like the judges are a partnership, the kohanim are a partnership, and yet we are treating the partnership as a collective, like a sibur. And we say that, no, the kohanim even are treated like a sibur. So too, the judges, although they are partners, their animals should not be treated like an individual's korban, that if he died, then the animal dies, but rather we should treat it the same as a sibur, that you would still have to offer it. Even if one of the judges dies, you still consider it like a sibur, and you should still offer it. Because here, to be Shimon, when it comes to the Kohanim, even though they are partners, and yet he's treating them as if it was a sibur, and is not allowing and not requiring that the animal be left to die. Amar le Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef backs up, defends his opinion. He says, Kohanim ka'amart, shane Kohanim di'ikru kahal dichtib, ala Kohanim v'al kol am ha'kahal yechaper. No, you can't compare judges to Kohanim, because Kohanim are different. They are in fact called a congregation. As the Pasuk says, and for the Kohanim, and for all the people of the congregation, he shall atone. So it's including Kohanim as being part of a congregation. And so therefore, Kohanim are called a congregation, and that's why their korban will be treated like a korban sibur, but judges are not considered a congregation, they're considered a partnership. The Gemara next asks, Ela me'ata naitu par behora'ah. If the Kohanim, in fact, are considered a kahal, that you just proved from that pasuk, then if the Supreme Court makes a decision and the Kohanim follow that decision, then maybe they should also bring a par. Just like each of the Shevatim are called a kahal and they bring their own par, so let the Kohanim also bring their own par. And if you say, yes, indeed, let them bring it, well, now you're going to have more Shevatim. All the calculations we had before are based on 12. And you say 7 out of 12 is a majority, 6 is not. It's the majority of the population, but it's only 6. So now we can have 13 tribes, and then it's going to throw off all of the formulas. Ela amar Rav Acha beRabbi Yaakov shibto shel Levi la ikru kahal dichtib hineni mafrecha v'ribiticha untaticha lekal amim. Rather, Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi Yaakov, says that the tribe of Levi, including Kohanim, are not called a kahal, because the pasuk in Bereshit says, I'm going to make you fruitful, multiply, make you a congregation of peoples, and I will give you this land. We learn from here, Kol sheyesh lo achuza ikre kahal, kol she'en lo achuza la ikre kahal. Only the tribes that have land are called a congregation, but those who do not have land are not called a congregation. And therefore, although Levi and the Kohanim within Levi were one of the tribes in the sense that they were from one of the sons of Yaakov, that's true, but they are not called a kahal because they were not granted land as an inheritance, and therefore they are not included in the basic count of the Shevatim, and they would not bring a pahad helim davar shel sibur, even if they on their own, even if they followed a mistaken ruling of the Bet Din. Now we have a problem, because if you remove Levi, then you only have 11, and we want 12. Abaye says that Yaakov blesses Yosef, saying that Ephraim and Menashe, the grandchildren of Yaakov, the sons of Yosef, will be like Reuven and Shimon, meaning that you're still going to have 12. You take out Levi, but you take out Yosef, and Yosef splits into two and becomes Ephraim and Menashe. However, Rava says, no, Ephraim and Menashe are going to be called are going to be equated with their uncles, with the other brothers, for inheritance. Only for inheritance, they get a double portion. That's the way that Yosef gets a double portion. He's now considered the Bechor. But that's only for inheritance law, not for being called a tribe for other purposes. Is that not true? They are considered separate for other purposes, and that is regarding the banners. When they encamped in the desert with on four sides, 3, 3, 3, 3, Ephraim and Menashe are counted separately. No, they have banners. They have their own banners only because they're encamped that way, and we want to give honor to the banners. And so we count them separately. It's true, not only for inheritance, we also count them separately for their travels and for the banners, because we want to give honor to the banners. You're going to have a tribe that has no banner while they're marching. So that's another exception. Wait, they have their own Nisi'im. When the Nisi'im are listed, Ephraim and Menashe have their own tribal princes. Oh, that's another exception. When you have so many exceptions, then the exceptions start to become the rule. And so we want to give honor to the Nisi'im. The Tanya Shlomo Asa Shiva Yemei Chanukah Mara Moshe Lasot Shenem Asa Yemei Chanukah Kedei Lachalok Kavod LaNisi'im. Shlomo made 7 days to inaugurate the second Bet HaMikdash, and Moshe made 12 days. Why did he have 12 days of the inauguration of the Mishkan? In order to give honor to each of the Nisi'im. And so now that we see there's so many exceptions, and Ephraim and Menashe are considered tribes on their own, so therefore also for the law of Par Halim Davar Shel Sibur, we are not going to count Leviim, and instead we're going to count Menashe and Ephraim as separate tribes. And so now we are back to 12. Mai Haveh Allah. And now we go back to the question that we brought up before. According to Rabbi Shimon, does he say that a partnership, like when the judges together are all a partnership, is that the same as a sibur? And they have the same laws as a sibur, as Abaye said. And therefore, even if one of them dies, a sibur doesn't die. And so too that animal would not die. Or do we say like Rav Yosef, that a partnership is not the same as a sibur, and if one member of a partnership dissolves, then in fact you do not bring that korban and it dies, just like an individual. So we brought up the two sides, but do we have a final answer? And the answer is yes, we do have one. Tashema de Tanya. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Hamesh hataot metot, velad hatat utmurat chatat, vechatat shemetu be'aleha, vechatat shenitkaperu be'aleha, vechatat she'abra shenata. Braita teaches that according to Rabbi Shimon, there are 5 types of sin offering that, for one reason or another, they're disqualified and they're left to die. You can't use them for anything else. Sometimes a sin offering, even though you didn't use it for the original purpose, or other offerings you didn't use for the original purpose, sometimes you can repurpose them and sacrifice it for a different purpose, or sell it and use the money for other kinds of korbanot. But the following, these are chatat, offerings of an individual. 5 different categories, cannot be brought, cannot be used for anything, but have to be left to die. Number 1 is the offspring of a korban chatat. You designate a korban chatat that's a female, and in the meantime, it gives birth before you slaughter it. And now it has an offspring, it's consecrated because it comes from a chatat, but no one can bring it as a sacrifice because the original person who sinned doesn't need to bring it, and no one else can bring it, and so it has to be left to die. And if you make a timurah, if you try to exchange one animal for another, then both of them are consecrated. But we only need one korban chatat here, so we can't just bring the other one. You're not allowed to offer a korban chatat when it doesn't need to be offered, and so that one will be left to die. And also, if a chatat is designated by someone who did sin, but that person died, the owner died, the korban chatat cannot be used for by anybody else, cannot be used for anything else, it's left to die. And a chatat where the owner already was atoned for by some other korban, that he lost it, he found it, and so that one also will be left to die. And a chatat that was not brought within a year, a korban chatat has to be only a year old, and so once a year passed, it can't be brought anymore, it's left to die. Those are all the 5 laws of korban yachid. Now, some of these will for sure not apply to a korban sibur, and that includes the offspring will not apply to a korban sibur because an individual offers a female as a korban chatat, but the sibur offers only a male for korban chatat, and a male can't bear children, and so this entire category does not apply to the sibur. And it won't apply to substitution because the law of substitution also does not apply to a korban sibur in the first place. So you will never have a second animal that's also holy because of timura. And you'll never have a case where the owner died in a korban sibur because the public doesn't die, and so these three laws issues never come up in a sibur, so they're just not applicable at all. But these 2 cases could happen where sibur designated one animal, but then they lost it. They got another one, and they used the second one, and now they found the first one. So that could happen with a sibur, and so we don't know what the law would be in that case. And also, if the year passed, that could also happen. A sibur designated an animal, and now a year passed, and it can't be used anymore. So what's the law there? Yachol yamutu, is it the same as a korban yachid or not? אמרת יסתום ילמוד סתום מן המפורש מה עשינו בבלד חטאת ובנת חטאת שמתו בעליה ביחיד דברים אמורים ולא בסיבור אף שנתכפרו בעליה ושעברה שנתה ביחיד דברים אמורים ולא בסיבור. Well, let's reason as follows. We'll learn the laws that are not said explicitly from those that are said explicitly. We see these 3 here. We know what the answer is regarding the offspring and the exchange and the case where the owner dies. These 3 out of the 5 apply only to an individual korban and not to a communal korban. If 3 out of the 5 already apply only to the individual and not to the public, then also the other ones where the owner already got atonement or it's over a year old would apply to an individual and not to the public. And so therefore we can conclude that Abaye is right, that a partnership is going to be like the public, because anytime we're not sure of these different cases, we assume that these individual cases, the korban yachid, that is left to die only applies to a korban yachid. But as long as it's not a korban yachid, in all other cases, we consider it to be like a korban sibur. In cases of doubt, we follow the majority. This is the 3 out of the 5, so we follow the majority. So here also, in partnership, let's assume that will follow the law of a korban sibur, and it is not left to die. See, Abaye is right. We ask a last challenge on that. Hold on, this whole reasoning, does it even make sense? You're talking about 3 examples where you cannot possibly apply because the cases cannot happen. A male animal cannot have an offspring. So you can't learn the 2 cases that can possibly happen from 3 cases that cannot possibly happen, and therefore this whole reasoning is suspect. So the final answer is Rabbi Shimon bechad makom gamir. Actually, Rabbi Shimon learned a tradition, and in the tradition, all were taught as one. All of these cases apply only to a sibur and not to a yachid. So the point is that only for a korban yachid, which means actually an individual where something goes wrong, any of these 5 things go wrong, then the animal has to be left to die. But that tradition teaches that in all other cases, whether they can come up or whether they can't come up, the sibur is a korban that's owned by many people, is not going to be left to die, and that will apply also to a case of partnership, and therefore this is a proof for Abaye against Rav Yosef. And with that we conclude the first perek, Hadran Allah Choru Bet Din.